you're supposed to make a forensics image before you start the examination. And in his report, he did some examination work, and then it said that he made an image. It's like, well, okay, maybe you just got that kind of out of order.
Yeah.
And he dug himself a deeper hole
Right.
because he said, no, that's correct. I made a forensics image before I did anything. Well, that's okay. Then there were some motions that were filed, and I got access to the devices that this other examiner, the opposing expert, actually went through and did their forensics examination. And of course, the first thing I did was a forensics image.
Sure.
The next thing I did was look at the last activity on that hard drive. The last activity was this person doing all of the things that he claimed that he did after the forensics image. And he actually did it on the actual hard drive and corrupted all of the evidence that was on that drive. Hello, welcome to our podcast, Digital Forensics Redefined. I'm your host, Calvin Weeks.
And I'm your co-host, Rob Walensky.
Digital Forensics Redefined. There is only one truth, but multiple techniques to find the truth with digital forensics. We explore those various methods by examples of real cases and incidents where digital forensics was either used or not used, and how that affected the outcome.
Calvin will be joining us remotely this week, and we'll certainly get to hear his fine voice rather than see his smiling face on video.
Well, this week's episode, the topic of it is something that is very important and vital when it comes to, our expertise and in what we do and helping attorneys or our clients with what we do. But a lot of times, what that means is sometimes we go up against opposing experts, and we're not saying that we're better than the other party, but there's a very specific service that we need to provide to our clients to help them, even if it's doing nothing but helping the others, helping them understand what the other expert just said, because it's technical language. And a lot of times the attorneys or the judges or the parties that we work for, they don't understand that.
Yeah. When you say, so basically you have a scenario of expert versus expert, that applies in almost a lot of criminal cases,
Yeah.
and almost all civil cases of any substance, even some divorce cases.
Right.
You may have experts involved.
Right. Yeah. And I think in criminal cases for a long time, a lot of times you don't actually have an expert versus expert because one side is, the criminal investigators. It's the law enforcement side, right? It's that bringing the charges forward. And a lot of times the criminals don't have the money to hire somebody like you and me to defend that. So you have that problem. The other issue is a very prominent, longstanding organization that most forensics examiners at one point or another is a member of, is the HTCIA group, which is the High Tech Investigators Association, right? And they have a bylaw that basically says in order to be a member, and sometimes people change that wording to say, in order for it to be a forensics investigator, you cannot work for the defense. This is the only industry that I know of. I mean, you were a cop. You had, you dealt with drugs. I mean, did, did you have anything to say? Well, I'm sorry. I know you're a drug expert, but you can't go up against me because I'm a cop and you can't do that, right? Well, no, you just expect that somebody's
Right.
going to challenge you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what kind of scenarios so a lot of times what you're saying, and I agree that the police might be the expert in a criminal case, or some entity that the police have. They may have a forensic lab
Yeah.
or some advanced trained officers or whatever that may do, say, cell phone extractions and obtaining evidence from cell phones.
Yeah.
And so a defense attorney may hire someone to take a look at that same data. So if you have two experts, shouldn't you have like the same answer?
Well, that's just it. I mean, this is forensics. This is based upon facts that you go in and examine, and you just bring out the information. Um, as professionals, I'm not going to sit here and say, "Well, this guy's guilty or this guy's innocent." That's not my job. My job is to just look at the information and examine that and just provide a report. It's up to the courts and the judicial process to determine whether a person is innocent or guilty. And on the civil side, who's right and who's wrong, right? But it's basically the same thing. So, I never understood necessarily that mentality. And as a cop and my buddies, I told them, I'm like, you're so hypocritical because I know when you retire, the first thing you're going to do is go work the criminal defense because there's a lot of money in it. They just smile, right? Because that's true. That's what you do when you're a police officer, you're really good at what you do. So I know whenever I take these cases, I don't look at it as like, well, there's another expert over there and they don't know what they're doing. That is not what I'm doing. If it's a criminal case, I would just tell the other expert if I could talk to them. But if I could talk to them, I would just tell them, I'm like, you got nothing to worry about because if you did your job right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to end up helping you prove this person guilty if that's what you've done,
But
and
when
that's the
you
risk.
but when you have two experts, I mean, with DNA, we don't have one guy get up there and say, this is Jimmy's DNA, and then another expert that gets up there and says, nope, this is Shirley's DNA.
Right.
I mean,
So
you may have, different methods of getting there, but ultimately the product in forensics would seemingly be the same. But even that's not
correct.
always the case with digital stuff.
Yeah. So a lot of times, whenever on the civil side, whenever attorneys will hire me civilly to do this, it's not so much to say I want you to go after that opposing expert. Usually it's the kind of thing the attorney's like, I got this report from their opposing forensic expert. I don't understand it at all. It's got language in there. It's all this computer, technical stuff. And can you just explain it to me? Right.
Right.
And then, once we do that, then there's a conversation and it's like, okay, here's what they're saying happened, blah, blah, blah. Well, my client says they didn't do this or that. Okay. Well, then that's where somebody like you and me, our investigative hat comes on. And then it's like, okay, well, let's ask some questions. Let me do an examination to find out, what's missing here. Are there any questions? When I read this report of this opposing expert, do I believe it? Does it sound believable? Does the facts, match up with reality?
Sure.
Things just don't magically appear. You know.
Right. And sometimes, I mean, if you, regardless of which side you're on in a criminal case, hopefully everybody's ultimate goal is justice for the
Yeah.
person charged. I mean, that should be
Correct.
the prosecutor, the police, the defense attorney, and everybody should be looking for that truth, because that impacts significantly this defendant, their livelihood, their job, their freedom, and a bunch of things. And a lot of times, and I just recently had a situation where I reviewed some information and that was provided to a prosecutor and the law enforcement, and they were like, it's right. That's right. And that ultimately there were some other issues in that case that defendant was dealing with, but as it related to the subject matter at hand, everybody, the defense and the prosecution and law enforcement and everybody involved, used each other's information to determine that there were some things that were just missed or just overlooked, or whatever the case was, but we got to the truth of the matter so they could deal with the other things
Yeah.
and not have to worry about those.
So that was the one where basically all you did was read the report and come up with your own questions. It's like there's some things that are missing here that you don't understand, and you felt like that maybe the other investigator just didn't provide it. The other side just didn't provide it to us to look at, right? That you couldn't see that. So maybe it was like, oh, well, could you provide the additional information? And
Yeah, in my final, in my final report, ultimately it was my final report anyways. I specifically said, just based on what I was provided, I couldn't connect those dots. I couldn't make that
Yeah.
assessment of what happened. And from there, the attorneys involved, and they obviously had contact with the law enforcement, and they came to the same conclusion I had once they saw that how what I pointed out there. So
Yeah.
a good resolution for everybody, because everybody agreed and nobody was trying to use something that shouldn't have been used there.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've, had direct contact with that investigator or the prosecutors or anything, but did did they seem appreciative that you pointed out maybe the error of their ways?
Well, I did not personally have contact with obviously
Yeah.
the attorney that I was doing the work for did, and um, he seemed nothing but positive about it, and the approach that the prosecution took to say, yeah, the guy that you had look at this, everything he said is right, and
Yeah.
they made immediate adjustments to the charging document, as it
Yeah.
related to the specific charges that I was basically looking at.
Right. That's huge for a case to have all the felonies dropped in a
Well, and it
particular
brings
case.
some confidence, I guess, at least, to that defendant, and everybody else in at least that case, that the system works a little bit. You have the right people do the right things,
Yeah.
and they can come to the right conclusions and decisions. So,
Well, I'm like any other cop. I want to see the bad guys go to jail, but I want to see the bad guys go to jail because we done our job right.
right.
You know,
Absolutely.
and that's what it boils down to. Another thing that that I realized in doing this kind of work, um, you and I have a very distinct background of being able to perform this kind of forensics work and investigative kind of work, that is kind of unique. And um, there are some um, people out there that are not necessarily truly experienced, trained, and qualified forensics examiners, but they claim to be. And they'll get in here and they'll start doing this work. And obviously, their reports reflect that. So a lot of times, they're IT people. They know how to look up things on a computer, and therefore, it's like, well, I can do this forensic stuff. It's pretty easy. Um, But a lot of times those reports that those kind of people that may be very good technical people, but are not good forensic investigators, right? If they're not really, very good at really what we're talking about is the legal side of it, right? So when they write the reports, it's very poor. So I've seen, I've worked cases where the opposing side was really just an IT person, but laid claim that they were a forensics examiner, and they actually had some declarations that were written. Those are sworn testimony, right? But they had to put it in writing. Um, and in their reports to read that, I'm looking at this and I'm like, this guy made a mistake in how he wrote it because it was kind of out of order, right?
Right.
Sounded like good principles of how to do forensics work, but when you actually look at the order of what he said that he did, what he said that he did was, well, you're supposed to make a forensics image before you start the examination. And in his report, he did some examination work, and then it said that he made an image. It's like, well, okay, maybe you just got that kind of out of order.
Yeah.
And he dug himself a deeper hole
Right.
because he said, no, that's correct. I made a forensics image before I did anything. Well, that's okay. Then there were some motions that were filed, and I got access to the devices that this other examiner, the opposing expert, actually went through and did their forensics examination. And of course, the first thing I did was a forensics image.
Sure.
The next thing I did was look at the last activity on that hard drive. The last activity was this person doing all of the things that he claimed that he did after the forensics image. And he actually did it on the actual hard drive and corrupted all of the evidence that was on that drive. It really didn't go good for them. They lost their case, obviously, after
Yeah.
I
Well,
presented my forensics report.
yeah, you made a statement when we started about, not that we're any better than anybody else, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that there are people in this business, this industry, this profession that are better than others.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, the getting the truth and the facts and doing it right, doing it the right way, from an evidentiary perspective and a moral perspective, for quite frankly, is as important as everything else. And there's things you can do. I don't think either one of us, since we've been working together, have had a case that we haven't consulted with each other on.
oh,
And
yeah,
you get, as you go, something might jump out and it just doesn't add up in your mind. So you
yeah,
shoot this over to Kelvin and I don't even necessarily need to tell you what my issue is.
yeah,
I just, you take a look at this and tell me, and more often than not, you come back and you go, yeah, there's an issue here, and
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
issue. So the peer review stuff is critical. I mean, you know, running stuff by other people that have, similar or more experience than you, or even sometimes less experience, just somebody
yeah.
that's, a different set of eyes, so to speak.
Well, I mean, you and I are really good at what we do, but we do have different backgrounds. I have more experience in other areas than you. You have experience in areas that I don't. We complement each other, and there's a lot of things that, we have very similar backgrounds. And the investigative background, the investigative skill sets. Not everybody can be a good investigator. I've worked with you long enough to know that you've got that investigator brain. You've got that thought process of an investigator to understand. It's like, okay, just don't take that for face value. Ask the questions, figure it out, right?
And sometimes with these things, it's hard if they just want you to take a look at the devices, or just examine
Yeah,
two phones, and you don't know. You want I you know like, my big thing when I was working is I was the interview interrogator, you know talk to these people thing. So whenever I see a report or a narrative of what somebody said, I want to hear the recordings. I want the context of it. And
yeah,
and quite frankly, when you're doing case reviews that involve electronic stuff, a lot of times that other stuff is relevant even
yeah.
to some of the digital evidence.
That's
I mean,
correct.
if somebody just wants to know, you know, have you download a phone and provide the data to them, then it isn't so important, because obviously somebody else is using what they feel is necessary. But if they're asking you to do that, sometimes you just need that context to know. Just saying, this guy's charged with a drug crime. Well, is it one delivery on one date, or are you charging him
Yeah,
with, a conspiracy over 16 months, or what are
yeah,
we doing here? So
yeah,
you got to have that context. And
yeah. Well, I've had attorneys to hire me and just say, "Well, here's the device. You need to find the evidence." Um, okay, well, I got news for you. Every device has data on it. And there's not any device going to stand up and say, well, here's a folder. It says evidence, and that's what you're looking for. It doesn't work that way. You got to have some context to understand. Well, are we looking for pictures? Are we looking for images? Are we looking for audio files? Are we looking for videos? Are we looking for Word documents? Are we looking for
right.
email? I mean, what is it that we're looking for here? And when you say, okay, we're looking for email, well, okay, he's got, you know, 10,000 emails. Well, what day? Who is it to? Who is it from? What's relevant, right? And sometimes attorneys and sometimes the opposing experts they kind of forget that and I've seen a couple of things like whenever some other opposing experts write their reports, there's 10,000 images that are pornography images, right? Okay, but here's 5 images. Well, wait a minute, you said there were 10,000. Where's the rest of them, right? I mean, you say that they're pornography, but somebody else may disagree.
Well,
So
that causes a lot of the kind of the point of our podcast was the expert versus expert thing. And
yeah,
if one side has an expert and their directions are to find, you know information related to XYZ, and then we get hired or another expert gets hired by the opposing side, and the directions are different. We may have both sides may have perfectly accurate, properly acquired data that
Yeah.
conflicts because the marching orders or the
Yeah.
the whole idea of having the experts wasn't the same. It was two
Yeah.
different, directions. So you have that come up as well. So somebody might say, well, their expert did found this. Well, yeah, but you didn't tell me I was looking for that. So
That's right. Yeah.
you kind of got that dilemma. So sometimes you gotta ask the questions, and sometimes the attorney or the party that's hiring you, they don't necessarily know what they want or need.
Right.
And sometimes you're just your experience or whatever, you can help them, or you can show them a set of data, and then they can, a lot of times they don't know, or they don't understand what your capabilities are,
Yeah.
or what the capabilities of your software are, and you come up with things that they didn't anticipate they may or may not have to proceed.
Well, you and I have some very good skill sets to find relevant evidence on a lot of different, topics, subject matters, or our focus, right? Um, but a lot of times the attorneys want to know, well, they don't know what evidence is there. They just know they got this device and they need to know, is there anything relevant on it? Okay, well, you and I, being the investigators we are, I mean, that's where we sit down and ask the right questions. It's like, okay, well, what happened? What is your case about? And that way we can kind of then start understanding, well, yeah, my client, they sent this email over here and there was this attachment that was a Word document, and then they said this. And I mean, okay, now we're putting it together. You said there was email, so we need to look at email. And then there was an attachment, and right, okay, we're looking for the attachment. What was the context of the conversation, the emails between each other? So I mean, you and me as investigators, we get that information by asking the right questions to help us understand what is going to be the relevant facts, evidence that we're going to be looking for when we do this examination. And yeah, we could end up finding a whole lot of information that the attorney didn't expect, right? Come across something that nobody really expected would become public. I've had that happen in a case where there was a person that was involved with um, taking pictures, and they were legitimate pictures, and it was legitimate part of the case. And so, really, the particular industry we're talking about, it was a doctor, medical doctor, and medical doctors take photos a lot of times of the cases that they're working on. So just tons of photos, and that's fine. And so my job was to go through there and find all of these different type of photos and pull out all images, right, to provide to the court system to do what they do. And I know that I come across some pictures that were obviously not relevant to to the pictures, the case itself, and what was supposed to be there. But I looked at my original request. My original request was I need to take all photos, get all photos,
Right.
and provide that. Well, I'm looking at this, and obviously it was of the doctor and another female. I'm going to assume his wife. I don't know, but they were in a compromising positions, and it was pretty explicit what was going on there. It has nothing to do with the case that was going on. So immediately I reached out to the attorney that I was working for, who did represent the doctor. And I explained, this is the photos that I'm coming across now. My order is to give everything. I don't think that these should be included, because I don't think they're relevant. And of course I had to provide one example for the attorney to go to the judge and say, "Look, we think these needs to be excluded." And in that motion, they won that. So I'm to include everything except for those particular pictures. And the doctor was extremely grateful, because that's embarrassing to get out into, essentially it was a public case. Everything is publicly available after things gets filed, and
Sure.
he did not want that of himself and the lady in these compromising positions, very explicit photos. And everything to become public. So a
Well,
lot of
sometimes the
times,
uh,
yeah, yeah, a lot of times we can help in cases in ways that were not anticipated or expected.
sure. Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, when you refer to experts too, I mean, sometimes getting that expert involved earlier on in that process helps as well. Um, you know, you and I've seen enough motions and affidavits and different things for specifically courtrooms, whether it's criminal or civil,
Yeah,
that we can provide some input in the words that they use in those too. I mean, because the words and the facts matter because the judge is reading it for its face value. So if you're saying all photos, well then all photos, and and the opposing side's going to expect all photos, absent revisiting the judge and clarifying some things once it's a little late, because now everybody's going to at least know that's involved, that there's an issue. So
yeah,
sometimes just narrowing that scope and things like that up front just makes it easier too.
yeah, yeah. And I have a feeling on this particular topic. There's a lot of issues around this expert versus expert and the type of services that you're talking about for expert consulting with the attorneys, the cases that we work on. I'm sure that we're gonna be talking about this in other episodes, in the future as well. So, do you have anything else to bring up about this particular topic for this episode?
Well, I think you're right. I think we could go. We could talk about this in almost every case that
Yeah,
has opposing experts. There's some unique factors. So we almost got to be. We almost got to talk about case specific things and whatever. But I guess the general point is that um, it happens. Sometimes it's simply an oversight or something by an expert that the other side catches or sees.
yeah,
Sometimes mistakes are made and that's brought out. And, um, ultimately at the end of the day, if a mistake's made and, you know, that's recognized and the parties are willing to admit that, which in this day and age can be a difficult proposition in itself. But
yeah,
um, it's just ideally you do it right. You utilize the processes that you have, utilize the expertise that you have, and you do the best you can, and
yeah.
don't ever compromise your integrity by trying to not tell the truth. That's the big thing.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, we're all human and we make mistakes. Now, as a forensics expert, you never want to make a mistake, but the last thing you want to do if you made a mistake, don't try to lie your way out of it. Just take it.
Absolutely.
Just take it and go on. Um, I thankfully I've never made a mistake because I've always used a peer review type process with everything that I've done. I want other experts, is like you, to always look at my work. You know, give me a sound check. Just have I lost my mind in making these statements? Um, and I've always said that we really have to be good enough at our job to write reports and to testify on the stand in such a way that other experts will believe us, but yet also at the same time that I can get my grandparents to understand it because they're not technical people. And usually everybody that's involved with this judicial process, they're not technical experts and they rely on us to be able to explain that to them. And we can't dumb it down so much that another expert will question everything that we put. So we have to put enough technical in there that another expert will believe us, but yet good enough that a non-technical person will understand what we're saying. And
I
that's
think
a
that's
tall order.
yeah, that's the key though in any court proceeding.
Yeah,
Your jury isn't necessarily highly educated in what they may be a juror for. So
correct.
they may have never seen a drug or they never seen a forensic cellular report or anything.
Yeah.
So being able to, I mean, that's key, is being able to explain that and get them to understand it in terms that normal people would understand. So
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of key and vital to I mean, anybody that's going to testify, but especially whenever we're talking about, our digital forensics work that we do, it is very, very technical, very, very comprehensive, but we can't make it complicated.
Okay. Yeah, and it's sure nice, I guess, to wrap this up when you do
Yeah,
a forensic report and another expert reads it or opposing expert reads it and agrees, or you agree with theirs. It
yeah,
kind of validates that you're doing the right thing, they're doing the right thing. It might be a slightly different process or procedure, but
yep,
the outcome is, the final product is ultimately the same, and there may be issues within that are arguable, but
yeah.
the facts are what they are. So
Yeah, and that's something that's true. I mean, you and I have a different background, different expertise, but I guarantee you, regardless of what tool and what I do, regardless of what tool and what you do, we're going to come up with the same results because the evidence, the facts, the artifacts that we find, it's the same. We can't just make it up. It's either there or it's not,
right,
and that's what separates the experts out from people who claim to be an expert.
right.
So.
All
Okay, well
right.
that's it for this particular episode. We thank you for joining us on Digital Forensics Redefined podcast. Please join us next time for a new episode to help you find the truth in data with digital forensics.
Take care.
Thanks for joining our podcast this week, brought to you by Defense Forensic, where we find the truth in data.
And before you go, please make sure to click that subscribe button and post any comments you may have about this week's episode below. Also, check out our website at defenseforensic.com for more information on the services available for individuals and organizations that require expert analysis of digital evidence.
And once again, thanks for watching, and join us next week for a new episode. And remember, the truth is out there.